Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on PASA Accreditation. My name is Lorraine Harper. I chair the Accreditation Committee at PASA, and I have myself worked in the pensions industry for over 40 years now. Our agenda today is focused on the whole experience of the accreditation process. Susan, if you'd like to move the slide on, please. Thank you. We are going to talk about the process itself for accreditation. We're going to talk about the benefits of accreditation, and we're going to give you the opportunity to hear also from our independent assessor on the more detailed parts of the process that commonly crop up in conversation. And we're also going to hear from two organisations that have been through the process successfully, and they are going to describe their experiences and the benefits that they got from it. So Angela Taylor will be representing RSM as our independent accrediting assessor. Sonya Purkayastha and Steve Richards of Rothesay Life will talk about their experiences of the process. And David Hutchings of Hymans Robertson will talk about the process from a third-party administrator perspective. As we go through the webinar, we would invite you to submit questions using either the question and answers facility or the chat facility that you should see at the bottom of your screens. We'll take a slight break after Angela's talk so that you can ask questions specifically about the process, and then there will also be a break for questions after Rothesay Life's talk and after Hymans Robertson. So, for those people who perhaps don't know a lot about PASA, I will just give a quick rundown of what we're all about. Susan, if you'd like to move. Thank you. So the Pensions Administration Standards Association, that's what PASA means, was set up to really drive up standards in pensions administration across the industry in the UK. So no matter whether you're a pension scheme, a dedicated department, whether you're a third-party administrator, an insurance company, a master trust, everybody has the same ultimate goal of delivering benefits to individual members of those arrangements at the end of the day. So we're all striving for the same good outcomes. And so PASA has set standards in order to drive up quality of pensions administration. PASA was set up in its current form in 2011 as a not-for-profit organisation. It did exist in another guise before that time, but over the last 10 years, it has developed substantially. And not only do we now award the kite mark, the benchmark for our industry on pensions administration, but we also have very close relationships with the pensions regulator. And some of you may have seen that the regulator has pointed the industry in the direction of PASA in a number of ways, notably around codes of practice and guidance that's produced. Can you move it on, please, Susan? So what PASA has achieved in the last nearly 10 years now is set standards for people to adhere to. And if people meet those standards by producing the evidence to satisfy our assessor, then they can use our kite mark, which demonstrates to the world that they've achieved that benchmark. PASA also has developed quite a robust assessment process, and that's what we're going to describe today to achieve accreditation, but also has done quite a lot of other things more generally in the market and across our industry. So there are codes of practice that have been developed by PASA. There's the Pensions Liberation Industry Group that was set up and has done a lot of really good work in anti-scamming activity. PASA responds regularly to government consultations, and to achieve that, it's got a wide range of working groups that report up through the various committees to the board. And we've also now got an annual conference, which started a few years ago as quite a small affair for a couple of hours from an afternoon to an evening, to now a whole day conference, which we held in February this year prior to lockdown. So there's a lot of work being carried out. But more specifically, moving on to talk about the accreditation process, the whole process is governed by the committee, which comprises 8 people from different parts of the pensions industry, all of whom have a direct interest in pensions administration. And the committee exists really to ensure that the process of accreditation remains robust. And we do that by reviewing and developing the process on a regular basis. And our last major review resulted in moving the frequency of the process from 2 to 3 years and introducing intervening annual certifications. That's just one example of how we review and develop the accreditation process. But ultimately, we want as many organisations to achieve the standard as possible. And so we try always to help organisations understand what it is required to meet the standards and achieve the accreditation, and to give them guidance wherever we can. And that might be just a general chat at the beginning when an organisation expresses an interest, through to real practical help in terms of the planning of going through the process itself, and the timescales and the resources and so on required. It is the PASA committee that awards accredited status. So although we have an independent assessor to go out and do the field work and gather the evidence and conduct an objective assessment, it is PASA itself that awards that accredited status. And we do that by working closely with RSM as our assessor. We critique reports that come from RSM, we raise questions, and ultimately when we're comfortable that all the evidence is there, we award accredited status and we provide a summary report to the organisations who have been through the process. And sometimes that report will have recommendations for further improvement between now and the next time they apply for re-accreditation. Our committee obviously has a close relationship with RSM, but also we manage that relationship and we monitor the work of the assessor, and we work with the assessor in order to develop the process as required. There's lots of things changing in our industry all the time, so we have to be adaptable, and we certainly do that. And of course, we look ahead into the future, and there's a lot happened this year that has made us stop and think about what does the accreditation need in the future. And so we're looking at strengthening standards around things like, for example, the protection of data and cybersecurity at the moment. The standards themselves are in 5 broad groups. So we start with a services agreement, and what we expect here is to see a comprehensive document that outlines everybody's expectations of each other. So what's expected from clients, what's expected from the services to be provided. And there are a number of designated areas that we expect to see covered in service agreements. I would say at this point, you can actually view the standards on the PASA website. So if you want to see more detail, just visit the website and you'll be able to see all of these areas with a great deal more detail attaching to them. Another area is, of course, governance reporting. So this is reporting on the activities of the administrator. And that would be a combination of things like statistics, measurement of performance, commentaries on what's happening, activities, behaviours, trends, all of that kind of thing. So we look for really good quality reporting that will enable clients, whether they be trustee boards or governance committees, to really see and be aware of what's going on and make judgments about developing the scheme or policies and practices and so on. Of course, another key area is operational controls and procedures. So this is where risk is managed on a day-to-day basis. And we look at the quality of those controls, and we look at how robust they are, and we look at how comprehensive they are as well, because clearly risk management is a big area for the governance of pension schemes. I would say also at this point that there's no one way of doing things. We know that different organisations will approach their ultimate goals in different ways, and the assessment is flexible enough to recognise there's more than one method of achieving the same end goal. Probably one of the biggest areas that we cover is data. Clearly, if data integrity is not reliable, then nothing else can be reliable in terms of administering pension schemes. And so that is an area of great focus, and it covers everything from capturing data, verifying it, reconciling it, storing it, managing it, keeping it safe. And it's the whole gamut of how you manage and monitor pension scheme data. And then finally, the last area is people, where we look at those individuals who are delivering the service, and we look at skills, expertise, training, and even well-being and roles and responsibilities. So those are the 5 broad areas. And as I say, do look at the website to see the standards themselves in detail. So because we've now been going for quite a long time, we've awarded quite a lot of accreditation, we've got quite a lot of experience now. And I've put together here some examples of the questions that we commonly get from organisations going through the process or thinking about going through the process. As I said before, PASA does award the accreditation, but the actual evidence gathering and the assessment is carried out by our expert independent assessor. The contract that you have is with PASA, but there will be a non-disclosure agreement put in place to reassure you that any evidence that you provide to RSM as part of the process will be treated in absolute confidence. But because the accreditation is evidence-based, it has to be the case that RSM will need to see quite a lot of information. And that's one of the big differentiators between PASA's accreditation and that of, say, an organisation like ISO. It is very much not just about saying what controls you've got in place to make sure you meet the standards. It's about demonstrating that you have met them in practice. As I mentioned before, we want as many organisations to go through the process as possible. So if you're thinking about it, you're a bit nervous, or you want to find out more, we are at your disposal, and I'm very happy to set up a call or meeting to address your queries directly. The other thing I would like to point out is that not all organisations will necessarily be ready to get the accreditation. There is a cost involved in accreditation itself, and so what we seek to do is to make sure that about a quarter of the way through the process, when you've provided the sort of answers to our initial questionnaire, we can usually tell at that stage whether an organisation is on track to meet the standards. And if at that point we felt that you wouldn't be able to, we would tell you. And you would get some guidance about, what you might have to do, and give you time to go away and improve things wherever necessary, and come back and pick up the process again at a later date. And Angela will talk a bit more about that. Partly because of that reason, we don't disclose the organisations going through the process. We only do that when an organisation has been awarded the accreditation and they are happy to go public on that. So everything is very confidential up to the point where the accreditation itself is awarded. And when you do get the accreditation, you do get a fairly high-level summary report that explains how you've met the standards for accreditation, but also makes any recommendations that we think are appropriate at that stage. There are other questions we get commonly. Sometimes organisations with multiple sites ask us, can we have site-by-site accreditation? The answer to that is no, it's all or nothing, because this is a benchmark that the industry now relies on in terms of demonstrable evidence of meeting standards, and therefore it has to be across the board. We can't police whether some offices that haven't been accredited are saying that they have, and so on. It's too complicated to do that, and it's much simpler to say there is no partial accreditation, it's all or nothing. As I mentioned before, reaccreditation happens every 3 years if you've actually met the annual certification in between. Annual certification is a much simpler process. It's a confirmation that nothing has changed that might affect your status in terms of the accreditation. And of course, once you've got the accreditation, you're free to use the PASA logo on all your communications and publicly display that benchmark. Just quickly, why might you go through the process of accreditation? It's an extra cost. You might have, you think your AAF reporting is adequate or your ISO is adequate, and some organisations do. But as I say, this is a different type mark. This is about providing evidence to prove your quality of service. And so as a result of that, it is really public recognition that, not only have you achieved the standard, but you actually have a commitment to carry on providing a high quality level of service and keep improving. And that commitment can be demonstrated to your own clients, your own sponsors, as well as the wider industry. It's also a differentiator. And what we're seeing now is that a lot of invitations to bid for work now ask the question, do you have PASA accreditation? So it is something that is really gathering momentum at the moment. And it's also an important point to bring out that your own staff can be directly involved in this accreditation process. And therefore, it makes them feel good often. One of the things we do is get feedback from organisations who've been through the process. And a lot of staff feel quite proud that they've been through this and they've got that benchmark, that demonstrable evidence of the quality of the work that they're providing as well. And I wouldn't underestimate the value of that, actually. So, as I said, we do get feedback from organisations. And what I've done on the next slide is just pick out, these are real quotes that came back to us as part of our feedback work that we've done recently. And you can read these at your leisure. We will be circulating a recording of this webinar at the end. So you'll be able to go back and read through some of these points at your leisure. So I hope that's given you just a very high level indication of what we're about in the committee and what the accreditation is about. I'm now going to hand over to Angela Taylor, who manages the work at RSM that is carried out on behalf of PASA, and she's going to talk you through the actual process itself. Angela.
Thanks, Lorraine. Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Taylor. I'm a Risk Assurance Manager within RSM. I am the lead in regard to the accreditation assessment process from an RSM point of view. I am both the main contact for the applicant and for PASA, and I coordinate the assessment process up to the point the draft report goes to PASA. For some, I will be a familiar voice and face, especially for those who have already been through the process. The assessment itself is a relatively straightforward process with a high level of communication throughout. There are 5 clear stages that we will walk through today, and each stage has multiple activities within. The stages are expression of interest, applicant preparation, submission and initial preparation, fieldwork, reporting. So if we take each stage in turn, starting with the first stage, which is the expression of interest. This is mainly dealt with by Lorraine as the chair of the PASA committee. Contact is made once the expression of interest is received by email and a call held to explain the process and answer any questions that the interested party may have. The PASA accreditation guidance is then provided. RSM is introduced to the interested party where an initial call is held, allowing us to understand the organisation better and giving the applicant the information to understand the process. Then we move to stage 2. This is where the preparation takes place. The initial call enables RSM to provide a quote based on the information provided regarding staff numbers and the number of sites, offices. The call also gives the interested party an opportunity to ask further questions that are specific to the assessment process. We will discuss the need for an NDA for the sharing of data that is required for the protection of both RSM and the applying organisation, the content of which is agreed by both parties before being formally signed. During this call, we also discussed rough timescales. This is very different for each organisation, but on average, in our experience, this will be 3 to 6 months after the questionnaire has been issued. It also depends on where the organisation is on their accreditation journey and could actually be longer. Once the initial call has been held, we will send out the questionnaire, which enables the interested party to review the standards and questions and decide whether, one, they will move forward with the accreditation. Sometimes this is where the process ends, and we have seen this in about 25% of the initial calls held. The timescale they wish to work to complete the process, and then to gather the evidence required to demonstrate the standards are being met. RSM are available to discuss any issues, such as a delay in the process prior to the submission of the questionnaire. All we ask is that we are kept up to date so that we can plan our resourcing accordingly. At this point, the interested party then moves to being the applicant. Close to the submission of the questionnaire, a discussion is held with the applicant to go over the process again. This will ensure that a timeline is agreed and dates fixed to commence the review. Also, we will agree how the questionnaire and the example support is provided. This could be a share file or email, but usually a share file is the preferred method. So then we move to the next stage, stage 3. This is submission and the initial assessment. The applying organisation submits the questionnaire and the example support covering the standards. Again, this can be through a share file, or RSM will, in some circumstances, at the request of the applicant, attend the site to carry out the desktop review. This will entirely at the preference of the applicant and will be covered in the call prior to the submission. We then carry out the desktop review, which is a review of the responses on the questionnaire and the supporting example documentation against the standards. We make further inquiries where responses or the support is not clear. This will be at the time of the desktop review to prevent any delays. Where there are no major issues identified, the site visits are confirmed, although these are generally penciled in at the time of the pre-desktop review call. This part of the process can take anything between 2 to 4 days, and that includes the internal RSM review. Prior to the fieldwork stage, RSM will request populations from where samples are selected to further test that the standards are being met. Whilst the example documentation provides evidence that there is something in place, we are required to further validate to ensure that it's demonstrated on a continuous basis. So then to stage 4, this is the fieldwork stage. This stage of the process is in normal circumstances carried out at the sites of the applicant. We are, however, adapting the process during the pandemic to be remote. Share files can be set up by either RSM or by the applicant. Again, this is at the preference of the applicant. We review the supporting documentation against our test steps for each standard, and again, we will ask for further support or questions depending on the need. Part of the process is to interview a sample of staff who are part of the administration teams. The employee can be at any level, the sample is completely random. The interview is to provide further support to the responses. This is a useful element of the process as it gives answers to questions that could not be answered by the supporting documentation, and is also one of the more unique features of the PASA assessment against other reporting standards. Once all outstanding queries have been answered, the testing is completed and an internal review again is carried out within RSM. The time on site is dependent on the size of the organisation and the location of the sites. For one site, the physical attendance can be 2 to 4 days, adding extra days where necessary for the extra sites. RSM produce a draft report for PASA, which summarises the findings and any areas of improvement. This is a confidential report to PASA. Lorraine will confirm as part of the stage 5 discussion that PASA's review of the report at the time raises any further queries, which will be addressed to RSM directly. RSM will respond based on the support already received from the applicant. It is possible, but rare, that further information will be required from the applicant in addition to that already requested. And then we have stage 5, the final part of the process. The draft report from RSM is sent to PASA, who arrange for the accreditation committee to sit and the report is reviewed. RSM conclude the work with the report to the PASA Accreditation Committee. The outcome and a summary report is provided to the applicant by PASA. The outcome is necessarily a binary outcome of pass or fail, but the desktop review process is designed to avoid a disappointing outcome. Next slide, please. So then we have some areas that we'd like to discuss in terms of common assessment queries and any points to note. So how long does the process take? As mentioned above, this depends on where in the process the applicant is. The duration of the assessment outside of the planning and the evidence gathering can take anything between 3 to 6 months, dependent on several factors. The availability of employees, RSM resources, when sample documentation is deemed ready for us to review, when the draft report is ready and the PASA committee are available to review, how long it takes for any queries to be answered. The actual days on site does not reflect the time and effort taken by the organisation to prepare supporting documentation, hence why the time frame can be so fluid. How much will it cost? The quote provided by RSM to PASA is dependent on the number of employees and the number of administration sites. What happens if we haven't met the standards specifically? As referred to on the previous slide, when no major issues are identified during the desktop review, the plans for the on-site fieldwork are agreed. However, there are some occasions where the standards have not yet been met. Once the desktop review has been completed, the areas of concern identified will be communicated to the applicant directly by RSM. The process can be suspended at that point and can be continued once the changes have been implemented. RSM charged 25% of the total bill at this stage to cover the desktop review element. This will be held on account for when the applicant returns to the process. When returning, we again ask for plenty of notice to ensure that the resources are available on both sides to plan for the continuation of the work. Areas of weakness will be re-reviewed, and depending on the timing of this, further improvements would also be requested. For example, if the continuation is 3 months, very few changes will be expected to the affected areas. If 12 months, we would expect there to have been some changes. The time frame for returning to the process should really be no more than 12 months, and the applicant should be able to demonstrate the changes have been made, effective enough for enough time, i.e. 6 months for updates to member forms. The assessment is outcomes focused, and we assess the standards have been met, not how the applicant gets there. So what does the fieldwork entail? The fieldwork is a stage that most organisations worry about, as this is when we are on site and carry out the employee interviews. It is where we sample test and confirm that the standards have been met on a continuous basis. We ask that the support is readily available where we have pre-selected samples in order to keep the time frame of the review to a minimum. This has been in the past been provided in different formats, i.e. hard copy documents or access to laptops, where the information is retained and therefore reducing the amount of paper use and keeping documentation confidential. Employee interviews are often seen as auditors asking the employees searching questions to catch them and the organisation out. We often find that the employees are very nervous prior to the discussion. The discussion is around 15 to 30 minutes long and is focused on the person's experience as an employee in the organisation to ensure that happy employees give the best service to the members. It looks at onboarding, training and development, etc. This could be an area that applying organisations communicate to their employees to ensure that the employee is not nervous and does not feel overly pressured into attending the interviews. We promise we're actually not that scary. In fact, what is the outcome of the assessment? The result of the assessment is either pass, there is a clear demonstration of the standards being met, or fail, the standards are not being met. We do everything to pick this up at the desktop review stage to prevent this being an outcome. We do not disclose to other applicants who is going through the process, and if the result of the desktop review is that more work is required, we will only communicate to PASA that this is the case. We do not disclose to PASA what the issues are. My personal view of the PASA accreditation is that it is a unique process that looks at the service provided to members to ensure that the processes in place are robust and they are getting the best service from their administrator. The standards focus on areas that are important to members, such as the importance of the employees within the administration teams. We at RSM meet with employees at each organisation and at all levels, which provides a more human approach to the accreditation. It's not just a paper exercise, it is about the overall experience. Thank you, and back to Lorraine.
Thank you very much, Angela. So if we just take a moment at this point, Susan, have we had any questions through from our listeners?
We've not, no. I wonder, there is one that was sent through in advance that might be covered here. And perhaps... what
was that question?
There was one which is, what do you see as the main benefit of accreditation above corporate membership, and how is this perceived by the industry?
Okay, thank you. Well, corporate membership is a demonstration that an organisation supports what PASA is trying to achieve and is itself trying to drive up standards of pensions administration. The accreditation is a step further, and that is providing demonstrable evidence that that organisation has achieved the standards and continues to achieve those standards and is committed to driving forward continuous improvement. So it is a much stronger case for the industry in terms of the quality of services being offered. I would say that was the main difference between the two. Any member organisation of PASA, of course, has access to all the guidance, all the working group opportunities, and to give feedback, and also to be part of the conferences and so on that take place. But the accreditation is focused very definitely on that demonstration of achievement for that organisation. I hope that's answered that question. So if there are no more questions, I'd like now to invite Sonya, Purkayastha and Steve Richards of Rothesay Life to tell us a bit about their experience of the accreditation process.
Thank you, Lorraine. So as a quick introduction, both Steve and I are part of the operations team in Rothesay Life and are responsible for our policyholders and the service provided by our outsourced third-party administrators. And we actually outsource to 3 large third-party administrators. So why did we decide to go for PASA accreditation? From our perspective, PASA accreditation is probably just another way of measuring how you deliver customer service. As Lorraine has already mentioned, good quality administration and good customer service is high on everybody's agenda at the moment, be it the regulators, trustees or members themselves. Both the pensions regulator and the FCA continue to make the point that we need to focus on customer outcomes. People expect to receive a good service and their expectations are just getting higher and higher. And having a benchmark can only be valuable in demonstrating what we actually do in the pensions industry. There are a few other reasons why we also decided to go for PASA accreditation. Accreditation doesn't just look at KPIs, but it also looks at the underlying processes and governance in order to identify potential issues before they occur. So, for example, you might have continued high SLA achievement, but that may only show half the picture. You may think that your administrator is responding to 95% of queries with an SLA, and we wanted to be able to demonstrate that we actually have a structure in place that fully understands what's happening to that other 5%, which is probably even more important. For a buyout provider, accreditation is also important as it highlights to new policyholders and trustees that pensions administration is critical to us, and we will look after their members when the scheme finally winds up and moves to buyout. I've personally attended lots of pensions webinars and seminars where they talk about the usual hot topics of data quality, GMP equalisation, etc. But as soon as buyout or insurers is mentioned, there's always a little bit of an uncomfortable silence. A lot of people don't seem to be aware that even though we're regulated by the FCA, we still actually follow quite similar process and controls as trustee schemes. We were therefore keen to go through a process that trustees might understand, and being accredited should be able to demonstrate that our administration is at least as good, if not better, than the service their members were receiving before buyout. As Angela's already covered, the entire process is independently audited, which makes the outcome much more credible to us. In addition, the accreditation process focused on us, Rothesay Life, emphasising what we do to ensure that our TPAs deliver a good service, and not on the actual service provided by our TPAs. They can get their own accreditation if they wish to. And this was something that was really important to us. We're also not unusual in the fact that we outsource to more than one provider. And it's something that probably other organisations can relate to, particularly where they may have a legacy DB scheme and a master trust with different administrators. However, having multiple TPAs is definitely not without its challenges to go through the process. And this is one of the points that Steve's going to touch on next.
Thank you, Sonya. Morning, everyone. By way of brief introduction, I work closely with Sonya in the Rothesay Life operational team, and importantly, I was involved in both our application for PASA accreditation and also the formal accreditation process itself. I'd like to firstly provide some real and practical views on how the PASA accreditation process actually worked for Rothesay Life. So as people are probably aware, Rothesay Life were the first insurer to gain accreditation. The reason I want to bring this out is that when we initially reviewed the standards and criteria being applied, it was clear early on that the framework was understandably more suited to the trustee world, with multiple references to trustee boards and sponsoring employers, etc. We therefore needed to work closely with PASA to review all the standards to ensure that they were fit for purpose for the insurance world. It did take time to review these, and at the end of the process, we came to the conclusion that very little changes were required, and the standards effectively transcended the trustee and insurance worlds. To bring this alive a bit, as a buyout provider, we do not have a sponsoring employer or a trustee board, so we needed to explain our own internal robust governance process and model and demonstrate how that fitted into the PASA standards. It is probably worth mentioning that we required 2 site visits by RSM so that they could get really comfortable on who we were, our slightly different operating model as compared to the trustee world, and how our entire model fed into the PASA standards. From a Rothesay Life perspective, we had an additional challenge in so much our operating model involves 3 separate third-party administrators, all of whom adhere to the same high standards of our pension administration service. As Sonya previously mentioned, whilst the accreditation was on Rothesay Life itself, additional effort was needed to obtain the required evidence for all the standards from not just ourselves, but from all our third-party administrators. The third-party administrators need to invest some time here, but we did the heavy lift, which was no mean feat. It was also important for us that during the application and accreditation process, our third-party administrators continued to concentrate on maintaining their high level of service to our end policyholders while supporting us on this project. And my final point on this slide about the process is that effort, time, and commitment were needed from multiple sources, from within our company, our own operational teams, our senior executive stakeholders, to our third-party administrators. There was an involvement at all levels, from pension administrators to Rothesay Life Chief Operating Officer. All parties had a part to play in investing time and effort in the journey we went through. So in terms of top tips, I don't think any of the tips will be a surprise, and they are similar to LCP's article published by PASA in May of this year. So first of all, you really need to understand the PASA standards and, importantly, the evidence that will be required. There are no shortcuts here. You need to understand these in detail and be confident that you adhere to them, backed up by sufficient and up-to-date evidence. My view is that these PASA standards should already be in place if you believe you are already providing good administration. So, for example, you should already have a robust governance model. There should already be a suitable services agreement in place with any third-party administrator. An appropriately structured induction, training, and development process in place for new starters will no doubt already be evident. So again, my point here is if you are already providing good administration, you will probably already be adhering to most, if not all, of the PASA standards. Of course, The collation of up-to-date evidence support your accreditation application will also be important. My second tip would be to package this up as a project with the requisite project manager. This is a recommendation, but not absolutely essential. As long as you understand key roles and individuals have clear responsibilities and accountabilities. Irrespective of whether there is a project manager or not, I do feel it is essential to have the usual robust project governance in place with an open culture of challenge and debate. Ensure you have key stakeholders who have the commitment and drive to work through this project. It is important to have the right people involved. My third tip is there may be some evidence required by RSM that is commercially or company sensitive. Evidence of board packs, etc. is an example where you may not be willing to share despite the requisite non-disclosure agreement in place. In this example, we provided RSM proof on screen supported by our Chief Operating Officer, which demonstrated the evidence that we adhere to PASA standards without disclosing company sensitive information. And my final point, this is a journey with high standards. It is not easy, nor do I believe it is intended to be. However, if you already provide good, robust administration, you will or should already have the majority of building blocks in place. Sonya will now talk about what Rothesay Life got out of this process.
Thanks, Steve. So one of the main advantages that we got from being accredited is that we were able to tangibly demonstrate that our administration is of a gold standard. We speak to a lot of trustees about their administration, and inevitably everybody always thinks their admin is good, and they're always keen to share their experience of their excellent KPIs that are being achieved. By being PASA accredited, we're actually able to validate our claim that we deliver good quality administration. And whilst our new business deals aren't necessarily won or lost on the quality of pensions administration, this is definitely starting to be an area that trustees are taking an interest in particular trustees who've always been paternalistic to their members, and they want to know that their members are going to continue to be looked after post-buyout. And independent trustees always take an interest in the quality of pensions administration. As Steve's mentioned, having senior internal stakeholders involved in the process meant that there was a lot of visibility internally on what our team does, and also pensions administration. As I'm sure all of you know, pensions administration is normally only talked about when there's problems to resolve. And obviously we don't have many, so we don't tend to get much airtime within the organisation. And therefore, so it's good to have positive news to be able to share with the business. It was also a beneficial learning experience for the rest of the team and helped with their development. They were able to get involved in the accreditation process, focusing on areas of business that they may not necessarily have day-to-day exposure to. One thing I would say is be prepared that even if at the end of the process you get your little gold quality accreditation, PASA will always find some areas for improvement. Anybody who's worked with us will know that this kind of mindset is firmly within our culture, as we never accept anything at face value, and we're constantly challenging ourselves to find more robust process of controls. Therefore, even when you are accredited, the journey won't stop there. Finally, there's no getting away from the fact that being the first and only insurer to be accredited is a good marketing tool for us, and it's definitely helped enhance our reputation in the marketplace. We are aware, however, that being the only insurer is probably not going to last forever, and we do wish everybody success on their accreditation journey.
Thank you very much, Sonya and Steve, for that. I know we have had some questions coming through. Are there any, Susan, that are specific to Sonya and Steve at the moment?
No, I would say they're much more about the process in general. So
okay,
perhaps want to pick them up at the end.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So in that case, I'll pass on to David Hutchings and invite David to talk about Hymans Robertson's experience as a third-party administrator. David.
Thanks, Lorraine. Good morning all. I hope you're well and thank you for joining us. My name is David Hutchings. I'm the Pensions Finance Manager for Hymans Robertson and usually based out of our London office. I'm responsible for our national client finance team, which covers payroll, cash management and accounting services. And my recent PASA experience is with the new annual certification process, and we're about to commence on our latest re-accreditation. I've been asked to give you a flavour of what it is like to go through accreditation process, why Hymans chose to become PASA accredited initially, what we've gained from the award, and a few top tips for any party looking to go through the process for the first time. Next slide, please, Susan. So firstly, why did Hymans go for PASA accreditation? I should start by setting the scene that unfortunately the key individuals within our third-party administration practice who originally led on our accreditation are no longer with the firm. However, I do have a good understanding from my involvement in the process to give a few examples and drivers for the accreditation. So looking back to 2015, both of our TPA leaders were an active part of PASA, and they saw the accreditation as a great opportunity to prove the quality of our service and boost new business activities through differentiation within the marketplace. By being the first TPA to be accredited, it would enable the firm to support PASA and demonstrate externally and internally our ability to lead on this important development within the administration market. We believe in the quality of our administration service and hold it in high regard, and saw the opportunity to go through PASA accreditation as a test of our view of best practice. As the accreditation has developed over time, we wanted the challenge to move forward with the industry as new changes occur. Our belief is that the accreditation should not be a tick box exercise to be picked up every few years, but something to build into your decision making at an operational and strategic level. As time has developed and other third-party administrators have become PASA accredited, we've realised through conversations with third-party evaluators that administrators now fit into two types, those that are PASA accredited and those that aren't, and we're very pleased to be in the former list. This is where we now look at the benefits we have experienced thanks to having the accreditation, some which were expected and had some that occurred as an unexpected byproduct of receiving the award. I briefly touched on one of these reasons for investing in this was from the new business perspective, and we've certainly seen success by being able to share our high standards for administration and evidence this to new clients. As more TPAs have now become accredited, it has also meant that when new clients are won, we know that working with an accredited TPA means that we'll have a similar best practice administration process, which will improve the transition experience for ourselves, the client, and the previous administrator. It's always nice to explain to new staff joining the firm that we were the first TPA to gain PASA accreditation, as we introduce them to our third-party administration department, our recent history, and our commitment to our staff development and the service to our clients. Internally, we have benefited from leveraging the award to promote our TPA services to internal consultants, new business teams, and the wider partnership. We're currently actually halfway through a major investment within our TPA service offering, which has the key theme of driving digital change across the whole of our TPA department. Obtaining this investment from our partners was certainly aided by the PASA accreditation as an example of investing in our high quality service offering. Next slide, please, Susan. So what was our experience of the process? So before we were even in a position to commence the audit for the accreditation, we needed to invest the time up front to review all of the accreditation guide, review all of our internal documentation to ensure it was accurate and implemented across all sites. We also had to check internal resources were available to assist in the audit, including our internal human resources department. This time impact will be different for all applicants, and it helps us that we also have a similar all TPA audit every year with our AAF. I recall from the original accreditation audit that I was personally interviewed by RSM representatives, or Baker Tilly as they were known back then, about the firm, my impressions and development opportunities open to me personally. We see a real benefit in having both the PASA accreditation and our annual AAF report. Both are valuable to us and our clients as evidence of the quality administration service, but both look at our working practices from different perspectives. The AAF audit primarily looks at our controls and their environment for testing of their adherence and their adequacy, which combined with the PASA audit, which focuses on industry best practice and a stronger focus on the client and member experience, I feel together these audits cover the full service and what a trustee board would find important in their administrator. Late last year, we went through the annual certification process for the very first time. This was a lighter touch audit, as mentioned previously by Angela, but it still covers 5 key areas, but focusing on significant changes in the prior 2-year period. We would complete this assessment ourselves before providing it to RSM, along with accompanying documentation examples for the audit. From start to finish, this took approximately 2 months. We, like many other third-party administration firms, are situated across multiple locations and countries, and in our instance, this is 3 city centres. We are very fortunate that our 3 offices are all of a similar size, use the same software and processes across all locations and clients, and we have the same training and induction process for all our staff. We also have a national client finance team which works across all of the locations. So we haven't been through any of the service acquisitions, so there are no legacy systems, teams or processes that could create an issue through diversion. This did assist us with the on-site audits, as although RSM were required to visit each location, testing of processes were the same across each site, which also reduced the amount of documentation required. I would like to note though, that having multiple sites and different processes is certainly no barrier to accreditation. The auditor will simply need to increase their sample size, and this will lead to a slight increase in costs, but accreditation is still very much achievable. This brings me nicely onto my final slide of my top tips. So to sum up my final thoughts on planning for accreditation, I would certainly focus on time. Always give yourself enough time in advance of making the application. Try to avoid rushing the preparation work and invest in understanding all of the requirements, especially when creating your portfolio of evidence. I would say that the more time you invest up front in the preparation and documentation stage to accompany the survey, the smoother the audit will go, saving time and both internal and external costs in the long run. Documentation is a very important part of the accreditation, as it will be the evidence that you present to RSM before the audit. I would always urge you, the applicant, to prepare the pack in an easy to follow manner. Thirdly, I would engage your interest in the accreditation early with your staff to gain employee buy-in. Explain what will happen, when they will be required to contribute, timetable for the audit, and why you're taking this route. I would note that you probably should allocate at least 2 staff members to work and lead on the project, so there is the right amount of focus and attention in order to deliver the accreditation smoothly. And finally, spend time researching the accreditation guidance in detail to ensure you're able to document and demonstrate each element of the questionnaire. Once you're accredited, keep this in focus in all the future developments that you make to systems and the way you work, so that the evidence and changes is documented and available to the auditor when the next accreditation period arrives. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear from my experiences.
Thank you very much, David. So if we could turn our attention to some of the questions we've had. Susan, would you like to?
Yeah, there's a few here. First one, is this accreditation available to private pension providers outside the UK?
We haven't yet provided the accreditation to organisations outside the UK, but given what I said at the beginning about the ultimate goals of the work that we do, be very happy to talk to anybody who's interested in that. So if you'd, the person who asked the question, if you'd like to contact PASA, we'd be very happy to set up a call and discuss that.
There's a follow-on question from that which asks, what does it take to qualify for it? Which then maybe...
to qualify for the accreditation, it's about demonstrating that you meet all the standards that are set out on the PASA website. But again, we're happy to answer specific questions from organisations quite separately.
Next question, how much does it cost to go for accreditation?
Well, the cost is not a fixed cost. It varies according to each applicant organisation, because it's based on the amount of work that is required to be carried out. And so a single site organisation would be a lower cost than, say, a multiple site organisation. But what we do is, rather than sort of pick figures out of the air, we like to have a conversation with each applicant and understand the structure of the service, the number of sites, the number of staff involved, and then we give you a robust quotation on the back of that.
Okay. And how long does it take to accomplish accreditation from start to finish?
Again, this is something that varies enormously between each applicant organisation. It can be done very quickly. You could perhaps achieve it in 3 months. 6 months is probably the most likely timescale for most organisations. But, you know, we've had other organisations that have taken 9 months, a year, because it tends to be how long does it take you, the applicant, in order to provide all the answers to the questions that are given to you, and also to collate all the evidence that you need to demonstrate how you meet the standards, and then to go on and be available for the site visits and the interviews and so on. So it's quite a flexible timescale. But the important thing is planning out, is understanding what's required at the beginning, and putting in place plans. And that's something where you work very closely with RSM as the assessor to help you.
Another question, when we speak about pensions administration, what does this name or work really involve?
We're looking at the whole spectrum of work. So if you take any typical pension scheme, you have anything from data collection and management, you have administration of benefits, you have communications with members, you have websites potentially to provide and support, you have call centres, you have payroll facilities for pensioners if you're a DB scheme, you have accounting function, you have quality assurance. It's the whole spectrum of work that takes place in order to support a reliable pensions administration function. And again, it's governed by each individual applicant organisation in terms of how that is structured and delivered. Some organisations might not provide the whole comprehensive range of services. They might share them with their clients, for example. So it's very much dependent on each one.
And a final one in this set of questions, does it also include asset management and drawdowns and pension payments?
It does. The simple answer, it does, but to varying degrees between organisations. So it's, as we've said a number of times now, that we don't demand single methods of delivering services here. We recognise there are lots of different ways of delivering services, different ranges of services being provided. So we look at what is in that client agreement to be delivered, and then we do the assessment on the basis of that information.
And I've had a couple come in from over email. Two questions. First one, the accreditation committee. How do you decide who will be on this committee? I'm presuming there are people from the industry.
Yes, we try to make the committee as varied in terms of its composition as possible. So we've got people who represent in-house pension arrangements. We have people who represent third-party administrators, people who represent assurance firms that provide that independent assurance over services as well. And also we've got people from different walks of life within the industry. So we've got local government representatives and DB scheme representatives, DC schemes, hybrids, all sorts really. So we try to be as varied. That all PASA personnel, apart from one, are actually volunteers. So obviously we can't always guarantee to get a really vibrant mix of people, because we do rely on volunteers. But we go out looking for people. The PASA board itself keeps an eye on the composition of the various committees to make sure that variety is maintained. And any member organisation can come and volunteer, and I'm sure PASA will be able to find them a job, whether it be on a committee or one of the subcommittees and working groups, of which there are a great many at the moment. So if you are interested in being involved, we would be absolutely delighted to hear from you.
Okay, and one final question that I have through at the moment. Do you find that any administrators are reluctant to go through the accreditation process as their information or intellectual property will be shared with potential competitors on the committee, for example?
We try and give all the assurances we possibly can. We do not share anything with potentially competitor organisations. The information that comes to us through this process is kept confidential. And all the members of my committee, for example, have to sign documents about managing conflicts of interest and confidentiality as a prerequisite of joining it. And we are very, very strong on confidentiality, very strong.
And that is all the questions that I have at the moment. I can't see any others there.
Thank you, Susan. Well, we've just about...
hang on. There's one final one there, which I think has just popped in. It just says, Is PASA ready to embark on a first non-UK pilot case for testing doing accreditation outside the UK for private pension administration?
Well, I'm going to be entirely honest with you and say I don't know, but I'm very happy to have a conversation and see if we can take that forward. So for the individual who asked that, please do get in contact with us and we'll have an exploratory call. Okay. We've actually used up all our hour on the webinar. And first of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to Spence Partners for hosting today's webinar. Thank you in particular to Susan, done a great job. There will be a recording of this webinar circulated, so you can share it with colleagues within your organisations. But I would also point you back to the PASA website, where not only can you find out more about the standards themselves, but there is a guide to accreditation and something called an obligations document, which sets out the obligations of all parties. So that would include the applicant organisations, RSM, my committee, and PASA overall. But just to reiterate, please do get in contact with us. If you've got any questions, we are more than happy to answer them or to set up a call to which you can invite colleagues if you would like to. So that all remains for me now to say is thank you very much for joining us.